Today I'm going to show you how to do a 360 turnaround in Unreal Engine 5. Before we do anything, we're going to make a cyc backdrop in Blender because it's going to be so much easier. So in the space, we can middle mouse button to orbit around if you want, and we're going to hit Shift A on the keyboard, go to Mesh to add, and add a plane. Now we're going to go up to the top left-hand corner, go to Edit Mode, and we are going to hit S and X on the keyboard to make it wider. Then we're going to hit SY on the keyboard to make it longer. And then we're going to go to Edge Mode, which is this button in the top left-hand corner. We're going to select this edge, and we'll hit EZ and scroll up to make a nice large backdrop. We're going to select this edge, hold Shift and middle mouse button to move our camera, and we'll hit Control B on the keyboard, and we will bevel this, and then we're going to mouse wheel forwards so we get a nice soft curve. Make this just a little bit smaller, and then from here we're going to go back to our object mode. We're going to right click on the mesh and go to Auto Smooth, and it's going to smooth it out. And then from here we will go to File, Export, FBX, and save this on our computer. And now we're done with Blender. Let's go to Unreal. In Unreal, you might have a starting scene that kind of looks like this. We're going to be working in the main level today, and if you have anything in your outliner, just go ahead and select it all and delete it. We don't want it right now. So what we're first going to do is we're going to hit Shift S, Control Shift S to save our project, and then we're going to go into our Place Actors panel. That is going to be on the left side here, or you can go under your cube plus sign menu, Place Actors panel. We need to add a skylight. Basically, under Lights, under the Lights panel, we're going to add a skylight, which is going to be right here. Drop it in, and I always like to go to my Details panel and center it up in our world. Now you could use an HDRI backdrop if you want to, but I like using a skylight because we're just going to be using our cyc background for our background. So we're going to right click in the empty space, go to New Folder, and we'll call this Meshes, or SM for static meshes, whatever you want to call it. Double click on the meshes folder, and then we're going to go into our folder and find the cyc that we just made. So I'll go to my desktop, find my cyc, and drop this into my content browser, and you'll get this window. We can go ahead and hit import. We shouldn't have to deal with any of that stuff. Now we're going to go ahead and take this cyc, drop it into my scene, center this up in the world, and then I will hit E on the keyboard to go to my rotation tool and then rotate this 90 degrees. I'm going to go up to my snapping with this button and then rotate this by 90, so it's exactly 90 degrees on the Z axis. Just 90. There we go. Cool. So now under the skylight, we need to add an HDRI for our lighting for our scene. So we'll go to our content folder. We'll right click in the empty scene, go to new folder. We'll call this HDRI, and then we will import an HDRI. Now I do highly recommend using Polyhaven for getting HDRIs. And one thing that is very important to remember is that you must use a .hdr file. You cannot use an EXR file for your HDR. I have a tutorial on my YouTube channel that covers how to convert these, but let's just go ahead and drop in an HDR file for our HDRI backdrop. I just have this cloudy scene here. Cloudy scenes will help us get a nice soft light. So with skylight selected here, we're going to go to our source type and change our source type to specific cube map. And we're going to take this quarry cloudy and drop this into the cube map. Now we have some light in our scene. You'll notice that the cyc is getting this weird little like banding on the texture. That's because we didn't do the UVs in Blender, but we can do that in Unreal very conveniently. In the top left-hand corner of our Unreal window, we'll go to our modeling mode, and then with the object selected that we want to fix the UVs for, the cyc, we're going to go to our UV tab. We're going to go to Auto UV. We'll see that we have a nice seam here that we actually don't like. It's not very nice, but it's giving us a little bit more even distribution. What we can do is change the method from Patch Builder to UV Atlas, and this will help us get that nice sort of full texture across our cyc. We can hit accept, and now it's going to look more normal. Let's go ahead and make a material for this. We're going to right click in the empty space of our content browser, go to new folder, and we'll call this materials. Double click here, right click, and go to material. We'll call this M_white, and then double click on this white texture. Now we could make this a parameter, but I'm just going to be really lazy and set this to, let's say, about 90% white, get rid of all the color, and then we're going to go to our roughness and set this to a value of 1, and then set the specular to 1 as well. It's just what I like to do. We're going to go ahead and save that. We're going to close our material and drop this on our cyc, and after a second, hey look, we have a cyc backdrop. Now, I don't like how I have this grid over my cyc. It just makes it hard to see, so I'll go to my show menu and turn off the grid here, and then now we have our cyc backdrop. Okay, let's go ahead and import a mesh into Unreal to do our 360 turnaround. Go to our content folder, right-click in the empty space, and we'll call this drone, because we're going to do a 360 of this drone that I made because I'm very excited about it. So let's go ahead and find that mesh. I have this folder here of my drone that I'm going to be working with today, so I'll drop this into my project, and depending on the size of your mesh, how detail it is, if it's a ZBrush thing or if it's some really high poly mesh, it may take some time to load. This one is kind of big, relatively speaking, for a game engine, but it'll still look great in engine. So from here, I'm going to get this menu, which is the menu to import my content. We normally don't need to change anything, but if you are importing something from ZBrush, I do recommend that you type in degenerate and make sure you uncheck remove degenerates. The reason why is ZBrush, the scale is oftentimes going to be too small for Unreal to compute correctly, so it'll delete some polygons. So if you're importing something from ZBrush, you may have to uncheck this just to get it to work, but most of the time it's going to be fine. I'm going to hit import into my scene, and after just a brief moment, it just finished importing my mesh. We can see that it did bring in a material. This material is going to be wrong and incorrect, but that's okay. We'll fix it in a second. I have my static mesh here. We'll hit Control-Shift-S to save it, to get rid of the little stars, and drop this into my scene. Now, I did make my drone very, very large, so we're going to hit the E key on the keyboard to go to my rotate tool, and then rotate this to be oriented correctly to my overall scene, and then I'll hit the R key and scale this down to be a little bit more manageable. Hit W to go to my transform gizmo and just pull this guy up in my scene. Now I do need to bring in some textures for this, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'll right click in the empty space, make a new folder. I'll call this drone_text. Cool. I'll go into my folder and find my textures. I have my folder of textures, and this does look like a lot of textures. I'm going to show the UDIM workflow, but if you don't know what UDIMs are, I'll basically say you don't need to worry about most of that. There's a tutorial on my YouTube channel, linked somewhere, that will cover more of the workflow, but let's just go ahead and import the material. All of the principles, if you are not using UDIMs, will still apply. We still need to make a material to apply to our mesh. So if you made your materials in Substance Painter or Marmoset or wherever you make your textures, we're going to go ahead and drop them into our content browser of our Unreal project. Now, if you're just using one set of textures in Unreal with just one object, you should be fine. But if you are using UDIMs, what you do have to do is go up to your project settings, go to project settings in the top right hand corner. You're going to type in the search bar virtual textures, and then you want to make sure that enable virtual texture support is on. If you are not using UDIMs, you don't need to worry about this. You shouldn't need to worry about this. But if you are using UDIMs, you will notice that when you have the virtual texture set turned on, and if you go into your search panel of your texture and type in virtual texture streaming, this is turned on. You will then use all of your UDIMs across your object. Now again, if you're not using UDIMs, you don't need to worry about this. It'll just look like a default texture, which is going to be just a single tile for your object. But because I'm using UDIMs, I'm basically getting a 10K texture over, 10 maps. So, long-winded, highly technical rant aside, you don't need to worry about UDIMs if you're not using them, but make sure you turn it on if you do want to use them and you are using them. So I'll hit Control-Shift-S to save my project, get rid of the little stars, and then I'm going to go into my drone folder, go to the material that was made. We can delete all this garbage that Blender made because we don't need it, and then we're going to go ahead and take all those textures and make sure that they are in my material window. Now from here, let's go ahead and select everything. If you right click in the empty space, you can move around your material menu, and we can go ahead and start piping in our textures to the appropriate slot. So from here I have, this is my color. We can see that here. We'll take the RGB value of my color and pipe this into the base color. Then I have my emissive. So what I'm going to do with my emissive is I'm going to hit M on the keyboard and hold the M key and then left click, and that's going to make a multiply node. From here, we'll take the RGB of the emissive and put it in the A slot. Then we're going to hold the 1 key on the keyboard and left click and take this constant parameter mode that we just made and put this into the B slot here. Under the multiply, we'll take the output and put this into the emissive color, like so, and that will set the emissive. And then for the B slot, we're basically going to multiply it. I'm going to actually set it to like 5 so it is a little glowy because it'll look nice and cool that way. We'll take all this stuff, drag it over here, take these guys, left click and drag to make a selection and move some stuff around. So this one is our height. We're not going to worry about this one because we're going to do most of our height data or our little details in the drone via the normal map. So I'll find the normal, right click, move around, and take the RGB and pipe this into the normal. Take this color, this roughness value, and pipe this RGB into the roughness value. And then I am also going to take this final one, which is the metallic, and put this into the metallic slot. Now, before we go any further, this will probably look different from what you textured in Substance Painter or Marmoset because of your roughness map. So if we go to the roughness map, we can see that it's this kind of like gray color on the preview here. If we double click this, we can see, hey, look, it looks pretty gray. Roughness maps in Unreal need to be set from the compression setting as default. You need to set the roughness map to masks, no RGB. And it's going to give you a big fat error, and you're not going to like it, but that's okay. Instead, we're going to go ahead and under this errored out slot, we're going to change the sampler type in the material to virtual mask. And this will be more accurate to the roughness map that you made in Substance Painter or Marmoset or wherever you're making your textures. Okay, so we have our texture set for our object. I will go ahead and close this. I don't need to see that anymore. And hey, look, our object is textured. It looks great. It looks cool. So now we can get to the 360 camera part. The first thing we're going to do is go to our content browser, right click, go to new folder. We'll call this underscore sequences, because that's just how I like to work. Double click on this, right click in the empty space. We're going to go to cinematics and add a level sequence. We'll call this drone underscore 360. Cool. Save that, double click on the clapboard that we just made, and now we have a level sequence. We need to add a camera, so we can add a camera by selecting this icon right here, the little camera button, and now we have a camera. Awesome. Now I'm going to go ahead and select my camera, and I am going to position this somewhere where I want to see my drone. So that looks okay, sure, but it's very blurry. We'll fix that in a second. I'm just trying to compose my shot. So what I will do is go to my Cine Camera Actor right here, and then I will zero out the Y, and then I will also zero out the rotation, so that we're looking dead on to our object. And if we go ahead and move our X value, moving back and forth, and our Z is going to go up and down like this. Now I'm going to take my drone and make sure that this is zeroed out, and then bring this up so it's nice and centered in the world. Now I'm going to pull my camera back just a little bit more so we get a full shot, and now we can make it less blurry by going into our camera right here and then scrolling down onto our focus settings, and under the manual focus distance we're going to click the little eyedropper and focus. Like so. Now with this camera shot composed, I'm going to go ahead and right click on my camera, go to transform and lock actor movement. That'll just make it so that we don't accidentally move our camera as we rotate our drone. My favorite thing to do when it comes to making little animations like this is go up to my basic tab and add an actor. And this actor is going to actually do our rotation for us. So I'll select our actor, hit F2 on the keyboard and call this rotate or something like that. Scroll up and then set the location to dead center 0, 0. Then under my drone, I'm going to make sure that the mobility mode is set to movable. And I'm going to take the drone and put it under the rotator. So now when I rotate this rotator, it's going to rotate the object. And the reason why I do this is if I want to swap out this project for something else, I can just put whatever as a child of the rotator and not have to animate new things every single time. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and take my rotator and drop this into my project. And I'm going to go ahead and set my frame rate to 24 because I like working in 24 frames per second. I will right click and move my space around and find my 240 frame mark. I can hold control and mouse wheel backwards to size up my level sequence and then go to frame 240. And then I am going to extend my output like so. You can also right click and hit set end time wherever you right click, but I'm going to do it right exactly there. And then now from here, we have to make sure that this camera cuts track that we made when we made our camera extends within the bounds of our in and out between the green and red boundaries. If you don't have a camera here and you don't have a camera cut track, you need to make sure that you go to add and camera cut track right there. Basically, you can think about this like a video editor like CapCut or DaVinci or Premiere. You need to have a camera to basically render your shot. Before we start talking about rendering, though, we do need to do our little animation. So we'll go to frame 0. We're going to go right there. And I'm going to go ahead and under the rotator, hit plus track and hit transform. Now, under the transform property, I'm going to make sure that under my rotation tab, the yaw is set to 0. And I'm going to make a keyframe by clicking on this button. Now, from here, I'm going to go to the very end of my timeline. And I am going to go to frame 240 and I'll type in 360 right here, and that should give us a 360-degree turn. Sweet. Now, what you'll notice is that it's going to have some easing. It's going to slow in and out. And most of the time when you want an animation like this, it's going to do a very linear movement. It's going to be rotating at a constant speed. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything and hit the 4 key on the keyboard, and that will set it to a linear keyframe. Now, if you want to do it manually, you can select your keyframes, then go to your sequencer curve with this button right here, and then you can select your keyframes and then make sure you set the linear interpolation right here. That's all done for me, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to my sequencer, and I can see here that my drone tail is coming out of my frame. So what I'm going to do is actually select my drone and hit the W key and just push this forward just a little bit, and that will allow me to keep my drone center. The axis point was just a little off for my animation here. Now, the lighting does look really strong and intense, so let's go ahead and light this really quick. I'm going to do a quick and dirty version of lighting. So go to my quickly add to project menu, go to visual effects. Where is it? There it is. And go to post-process volume. Now, my preferred workflow for working in Unreal is using a post-process volume. I will zero out the location. In the search bar, I will type UNB to set this to infinite and make sure that the post-process volume affects everything in my scene. I will clear the search under the details panel. Go to my exposure tab. I will set my metering mode on. I will set this to auto exposure basic. I will set my exposure compensation to 1, turn this on. I will set my min and max. I will turn these on and set these both to 1 and 1 as well. And what this is going to do is basically use manual camera settings for our camera. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my lights tab in my place actors panel. I'm going to add a rectangular light. Drop this into my scene, and I'm going to zero it out. I'll hit the E key on the keyboard to go to my rotation tool, rotate this to point directly downwards, hit the W key, and point this straight up. Now I'm going to bring this a little bit higher, so it's just at a frame, like so. I'm going to set this to, like, let's say 100 and 100 for the source, width, and height. The reason why is a larger light is a softer light. If I make this even larger, we can see that the shadows get nice and soft. Your shadows may also look a little crunchy, so one thing you can do to help is go to your search bar of your details panel of your light and type in ray and set your cast raise trace shadows to on. I'll go ahead and turn this on, enabled, and that might soften up the shadows a little bit. Depends on your project and your graphics card. And yeah, I'd say that looks nice and soft. Now, one thing I don't like is how bright my background is. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my Cyc backdrop, double click on the material. Under my material window, I will just bring this down to, let's say, like, I don't know, 75%-ish, give or take. Hit OK, and I will have to save it, and then it'll load in my viewport. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Just looking at that by itself, I am so much more stoked about that. So we have some lighting that looks half decent. We have our drone. We have the UDIMs. We have all the little things. You could go ahead and dress this up however you want. I'm going to go ahead and render this and wrap up this tutorial. So under the clapboard of our sequencer, we can click that and get our movie render queue. This will enable us to render our shot. So we'll go to our job, our first job, Drone 360. Click on the unsaved config. I always like to delete the JPEG because I prefer working with PNGs. It's just a habit. And then I will go to my settings right here. And under the settings, I will add anti-aliasing. I will keep the spatial count at 1. I will set the temporal count to 8 as a default. I will turn on my override anti-aliasing and set it to none. I will turn on render warm-up frames, and then I will set this to 48 and 48. This is basically going to like preload the engine, so then we can load all the things into the scene and the sequence. Once that's done, we can go ahead and go to our output, go to our 3 dots of our output directory, and save this somewhere on our computer. I have a folder on my desktop, so I will just hit select folder, drone tut 360 render, select folder, hit accept, and click render local. Once you do that, it will load up on the other monitor, and now we have a 360 shot rendering. So we're just going to let this cook, and then we'll import it into DaVinci Resolve.
A few moments later.
So I have my shot done. I'm in DaVinci Resolve now. I'm going to go ahead and find my shot. So I can go to Unreal, and under the movie render queue, I can click on my output folder, and it's going to load up my folder here. Minimize Unreal, select everything, hit Control A, and drop this into DaVinci Resolve. And now I have my little sequence. I can right click on this and hit create new timeline using selected clips. Call this drone spin. Sweet. And now we have a 240 frame animation, and if we play that back, as we play this back, I can see that there's a good amount of motion blur. So if I were to re-render this, I would actually set this to like 360 frames, maybe even 720 frames. Basically, I would slow down the rotation, but forever how long the animation lasts, I would just make sure that the last frame of the render is at 360 degrees to get that full rotation. But now from here, I can just hold Alt and drag, and this should loop, and now we have an infinite loop if we wanted to. Or you could very well render out, I don't know, 20,000 frames of a loop if you wanted, but that's just going to eat up a bunch of hard drive space. So we have our 360 degree shot of our thing. We covered a lot in this tutorial, even some advanced things like UDIMs and textures and virtual streaming and whatnot. But overall, I found that using Unreal for doing 360 degree turns is useful because I can do a 360 degree spin rather than, you know, like basically wait hours for a freaking render of just a 360 degree spin of some art that I made. So Unreal is sweet, and I like it that way. All right. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, let me know in the comment section down below. Questions, comments, concerns, whatever else, comment section is down there for that as well. And did you know in the description there's some links probably to the project files, and also I will shamelessly self-plug, I am starting to do some online coaching. So if you have some interest in learning more about how I do some of this stuff, go check out the links. I would love to help you out with some stuff. There's a free version of it, by the way, just so you know. Okay, that's it. Last tip, as always, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight gains. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.